Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to We Gotta Talk, where the motto is real talk, big topics. And I have a guest on this week, a repeat guest, in fact, that I'm so excited to welcome back. We love to dig into difficult but worthwhile topics here on the podcast. And today's guest is not only a cognitive psychotherapist, she's also the author of a new book that has just been released. It's called This Book Won't Make You Happy. God, I love the title of this. And our guest is Nero Feliciano, who you may have heard on a few episodes back. Hi, Nero. How are you?
Hi, Sunny. Doing well. Happy to be here.
You're one of those people I feel like we're friends in addition to being professional acquaintances, and I just am immediately calmed by your energy. So I'm good. I'm good
Oh,
talking to you. How are you? How have
good.
you been over the past couple of years?
Oh my gosh, I know. Through pandemic and kids and book writing, it's been a crazy time, but grateful, very grateful,
Yes.
and grateful to be coming out of it. Kids doing well, those things, the important things.
The important things. Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
we're going to talk about today. And you're the mom of four kids.
Yeah.
You live in the Northeast. We were just laughing off camera about the gray skies that are still outside.
Cold. It is cold. It was snowing 2 days ago. It's almost April. I know.
Oh, I know.
I need to move where you are. I
Listen, we
do.
got a guest room, we got space. It is nice. And I want to get to that toward the end of this interview too, like the different
Yeah.
experience of the pandemic that we all had,
Yeah.
depending on our geography and the
Mhm,
impact of
mhm.
that. But let's talk about your book. I have been going over this, and I guess it's partly because I know your voice and I know your tone and how
Yeah.
you communicate so beautifully in general, but it came across like a great chat with a friend, like
Mm,
a friend that you can feel vulnerable with. And
mm.
I'm I don't know, I just immediately kind of fell into it. Tell us how this all got started and how you became an author, which we were also talking about offline, kind of serendipitously, right?
Yeah, very serendipitously. And I know it doesn't happen like this for many people, but I had thought about writing this book. I had given a talk, I think it was 2017, on contentment and the practices that help us feel more content with our life, even without anything circumstantial changing. And that talk got a very big response. So I had put together this book proposal, which I tabled because we entered the pandemic and I had four kids remote learning at home. I wasn't about to sit down and start writing a book. And especially as a psychotherapist during a national mental health crisis, I stayed working and really busy and had patients come back from everywhere. But in 2020, I received an email from an acquisitions editor asking if I was working on any book proposals, which I thought it was a joke. I sent that email to some author friends. I was like, is this a prank? Is this a joke? I mean, someone's asking me if I am working on a book, which I had written that proposal and tabled. So that's how the book came about, and kind of had a natural evolution while I was writing it, just in terms of including different things that became relevant as we were living it during the pandemic.
Yeah, I knew you were my people. I mean, I've known you were my people for a long time because we've been on and off chatting for a while. But when you said in the book, you're sitting next to your friend who's talking about in April, the summer she has planned out for your kids, and you're like, mm-mm. Like,
I'm
no,
like,
this is so me to a
yeah.
T. I just, your general philosophy on taking things as they come just really,
Mm.
really resonates with me. Yeah, not that mom, not the summer plan.
No, no. Well, it's like, when your life is full and busy. I have four kids, I have a practice. They have their own worlds of activities, and we want to parent them too, right? We want to have conversations with them. I can only take things one thing at a time,
Right,
and that's really what's taught me how to do that, was saying, okay, this is all I can manage right now, and that's okay. That's
right.
okay.
Yeah, I want to get into expectations and
Mm.
shoulding ourselves, as
Yeah.
you. But let's start off at the top first. I think it's important to make a distinction, as you really eloquently do in this book, between happiness and contentment. Why
Mm.
both are worthy goals at
Yeah.
certain points in our lives, but how they're different. So, can you walk us through that?
Absolutely. So I define in the book very simply, if happiness is having everything you want, then contentment is wanting everything you have. And it's really, happiness in and of itself is not a bad thing. We want that. We want to feel happy. It's just the definition that we've been sold by our culture of happiness that's creating more stress and anxiety. And that really is happiness that's based on acquisition or achievement or moving up some sort of ladder of success that we're striving for. And we see this with our kids now in terms of how they're navigating life and what we've told them is important to be successful. And we often fall into it ourselves on many different levels. So, because we're so caught up in that process, we don't always stop and look at, okay, what's good already? What do I have to enjoy? What are these things in life that can make me feel fulfilled without acquisition or achievement? So that's kind of the definition of contentment, to be satisfied really with who you are, what you have, different parts of your life, maybe not all of your life, but certainly different parts that are still valuable and good and enough.
And you can still be a goal oriented person, a person who hopes for more in many aspects, but still be content, right?
Yeah, someone asked me that on an interview. They said, "Are you saying to be content means you give up your goals? Contentment is complacency?" I'm like, "Look, sister, I got 4 kids, a therapy practice, and I wrote a book in a pandemic. I have goals. I love goals. I think we need to set goals in order to move forward, and they keep us accountable. And there is research that says when you set goals, you are more likely to achieve whatever that outcome is. But especially for goal driven people, we often think, all right, I will be satisfied, content, and happy when I get there, when I achieve whatever that is that I've set out to do. And it's important that we balance that with moments of, okay, let me stop and take a breath and just enjoy the goal that I just achieved before going to the other one, or in the process of getting to that goal, focus on what is fulfilling right now.
Isn't there some science to show as well, Nero, that as you appreciate and have moments of gratefulness for what you have, then it actually clears the path sort of energetically for more success? I mean, doesn't it sort of open that channel to, not to get super woo woo, but like
No,
there's no moving forward and achieving more without appreciating what you already have, right?
absolutely. Well, there's some people who keep achieving. They go from one goal, they hit that benchmark, and then all of a sudden that goal they that's they go on to the next one. But you're absolutely right. For one, in that process of goal driven achievement, we do experience stress. And when we can stop and access those practices of gratitude, self-compassion, connecting with people who are important to us, it lowers stress. So when we neurobiologically lower stress in our body, it means less cortisol, less adrenaline. It gives us more mental space and neuro energy to put towards the things that we're actually moving towards, those goals. So we've seen when people access these practices, not only do they get to a higher level of success, I mean, we see that with self compassion alone, but they are healthier physically, they're healthier emotionally and mentally. Through all of these practices, Sunny, what amazed me most is there are correlations with longevity. People are living longer because they're physically healthier, because they've reduced stress in their life, and they feel more fulfilled by things that are more accessible. So, all sorts of research. I talked about some of it in the book, but yeah, you're absolutely right. You become more successful when you can access gratitude and appreciation and connection. Some of the few practices I talk about in the book.
Yeah, yeah. So in the book, guys, it's set up. The first half is all about why happiness is so hard to find. The second half
Mm,
is what you call the 8 keys to finding contentment. So let's start at the beginning of the
mhm.
book. You walk us
Sure.
through so many things that are prevalent in society today that either knowingly or unknowingly kind of throw us off the path toward happiness
Mm,
and contentment. Interestingly, you talk about dopamine, which is that feel good chemical that we've all been told is something that we want to chase naturally or find a way to connect with naturally. But what was interesting to me, and I only discovered when reading your book, was there's an extra element to that constant chasing of next big goals and next big
mm.
successes that we don't know specifically about dopamine. Can you explain why using that as our pathway toward happiness might not be the most sustainable way to find it?
Yeah, that's a good distinction. And dopamine, we hear about it in terms of the pleasure neurochemical. It shows up when we feel good. It's associated with things that give us a natural high. But the thing about dopamine is it's only around when it's a new or novel pleasure. Once we get used to something, we no longer see dopamine. but it also seals this neurobiological reward pathway. So when we experience that dopamine and when it starts leveling off, we are urged to go seek it again. And we can see this in a very clear example on social media. We talk about going on social media and getting that momentary pleasure when we get a comment or a like, or someone, validates us in some way or another. But that wears off over time. So then we go and seek it again. We go back on, we spend more time, we keep posting, whatever it might be, and looking for those, quick fixes of gratification. And that can translate to a lot of different things. I talk about in the book how, like, you buy this beautiful dress or pair of shoes and you love it so much for a little while, and all of a sudden you're looking for the next one because it doesn't give you that same rush of excitement or pleasure. That's dopamine wearing off, but then we tend to seek it again. So yeah, the dopamine highs are something to be aware of.
And
Certainly
what's
chasing.
the more sustainable thing then to chase, Nero? If it's
Yeah.
not the acquisition part of it, if
Mhm.
it's not the finding a new goal and slaying it kind of
Yeah.
thing, what are
Yeah.
we supposed to be chasing?
Yeah, and those have a place. Those have a place in our life, like we talked about. I mean, they're good. We want some dopamine highs. There is excitement and pleasure like that. But when we feel like that's the only way that we can feel happy, that's when it gets dangerous. So, aside from acquisition pleasure, I talk about appreciation pleasure, the things that are more accessible. And they actually, what's interesting, and I talk about the pathways in the book, hopefully not in like medical doctor speak, like you said, I loved that. Um, it's more because that pathway, and the other kind of acquisition dopamine generating pathway, they tend to cancel each other out. So it's hard for us when we're chasing those dopamine highs to sit in that appreciation pleasure experience. But we can train our minds to become more appreciative. So even just taking a walk, you live in beautiful sunny Florida, which is something that I would appreciate right now in Connecticut, but going outside and taking in your surroundings, the warmth of the sun, sitting in those moments and noticing those details also fill us with pleasure, but that's a more sustainable pleasure. Does that make sense? It's
Makes
not
total
this kind of one and done type of thing. Then we're seeking more because it's accessible. We can tap into it more often.
Well, and the danger too, I mean, obviously from a layman's perspective of acquisition pleasure is that you acquire things and then things inadvertently clutter your space and your mental
Ah,
space.
yes.
And then it becomes a cycle of I chase it, I get it, I have it, I hate it, I want to get rid of it. I chase it, I have it, I hate it.
Yes.
And so I liked the distinction you made there because it's hard not to be impacted by what we see others doing or acquiring and feel like we might also chase that. I always say, I always joke, I feel like not quite a regular woman because I wish I liked shopping more. I
Yeah.
wish the pleasure of getting a new handbag or like I want, and I do. There's no lack of appreciation there, but I see on social media, which we're going to get to next, all
Yeah.
of these posts about, the next bag you need or the next pair of jeans you need. And I
Mm.
want that. I want to be that girl. I want to look cute in a row.
You do look cute. You're
Have a
very
great
cute.
I mean, it's these two sides of me that just like,
Yeah,
that are at war. It's hard to be in this current society and not feel pressure that you should be chasing things, to be honest.
that's right. That's right. And interesting what you say about clutter. I just did a segment about clutter, and there is research to say that people who struggle with constant clutter, and I may fall into that category, do do report lower levels of life satisfaction, an increase in cortisol and adrenaline, so our major stress hormones, and that longer term can result in more physical illness. So
Ooh,
it's interesting, like you hear that phrase, clutter in your space equates to clutter in your mind. There's more truth than that, at least according to the research, than we would think.
I love that. Let's
Mm,
delve into social media, selfie
yeah.
culture. You dedicate a decent
Mm.
of your book to this. I loved, by the way, the mention of your daughter keeping your sixth grade picture on your phone as a reminder to like of what we used to have to deal with growing up.
Oh
There
my
were
gosh.
pictures, there was no way to cutesy up your yearbook photo back
No,
then. I bet.
no.
Who is this, Uncle Raul? And you're like, no,
I,
it's me.
I'm like, that's your mother in eighth grade. This is not a 45-year-old man. I'm sorry. Yes, you guys are cute, right?
Oh,
But
so funny. I
makes
mean,
them feel better about
I
themselves.
know this is something we've heard, experts sort of ring the bell on time and time again, is the impact of selfie culture, social media
Mm.
on our children, especially in their ability to find happiness and contentment. But what have you found in your practice about how it's impacting adults as well?
I mean, we know from the research that the more that you post, the more that you filter, especially selfies, makes us more hypercritical of all the features on our face and flaws. So things that we may never have noticed before. And I talk about my own experience with that now, doing what I'm doing on social media, and how I became very hypercritical of myself. We start to notice things more. So you think for adults, when we've already kind of formed our identities, so to speak, and our sense of self, even though that's constantly evolving, even into adulthood as we transition to different roles in our adult life and seasons, we might be able to handle that better. But young people, who this is kind of the only air they've breathed since they were growing up, they have a lot harder time with this. And oftentimes, have different sites where they can test post and see how things look
The
before they,
Finstams, the Finstas?
yeah, the Finstas and things like that, or even ones that really no one's on, that
Oh
they
my
can just
gosh.
check what they look like to make sure they feel secure with that before they post it. But the research says people who actually doctor their pictures don't feel any more content or satisfied than people who don't, and in fact can become more hypercritical once
Oh,
they're evaluating it through those lenses. So yeah,
that's
there's a
interesting.
huge impact in how we see ourselves.
Yeah, gosh, I feel like I talk out of both sides of my mouth here. I have an interview coming up with an amazingly gifted plastic surgeon and aesthetics expert in a couple of weeks. And
Mm,
we
yep,
talked about this impact and how it shows up in her business too. And I think you can be a well-adjusted, fully psychologically developed adult and do things that make
yeah,
you feel better about how you look.
absolutely.
But then you go to try to raise daughters, especially, and say, I mean, you have to get to that point before you are
Yeah.
stable enough, but grown enough to make these decisions. But it's become a difficult society to navigate because there are so many options, and they do see us show up looking different ways with our makeup on
Yep.
and present. How can you tell me, mom, that I don't need to do this if I see you going out in your makeup, but I don't need makeup. I'm beautiful without it. It's just like a
Right.
lot of conflicting narratives, but it seems to be because of the exposure to all these different images and procedures on social media that weren't there before.
That's absolutely right. So there's definitely more exposure. There are things that have become more normal, and there are many things in our culture that have become more normal that is not all that healthy, that I talk about at the beginning part of the book. And with something like, um, I do believe that women have a right to make their choices for themselves. If that is going to make them feel better, then they need to be empowered to do that, right? And encourage. But we have to also realize the messaging that goes with it, and also consider what's the end point, because we're all getting older. We can continue to change ourselves to to infinity, and I think sometimes that becomes a slippery slope. It starts with one thing,
Right.
and all of a sudden you may not recognize who you are at the end of it. That may be desirable and beautiful for you, but you also have to think about the messaging that it sends, and that your messaging is consistent, with what you're saying to, especially if you're a parent, to your children.
Right. I love this phrase. Okay, so hold on, let me change this lower third here. I'm producer and host today.
I love it.
Okay, so speaking of social media, I have this thing, Nero. It's very judgmental of me. I'm not going to walk away from that because it is rude of me. But there are couples where you scroll on Instagram and one half of the couple writes this
Mm,
love poem to their partner on there, and not just oh God, I love this guy, or look at her, she's
I know.
it's like,
Yep.
the Megan Fox of it all. Like we drink each other's blood or like whatever. We're dedicated. We love each other so much. I try not to be judgmental, but you have this phrase that you use in the book It says
What did I say? Oh.
deception shrouded in perception. And you
Mm,
talk specifically about this type of person where you see coming in to work with you who may be actually sadly dealing with some serious issues with their partner, but on the
yeah.
outside is presenting something completely different. Why does that happen? And
Hmm.
we speak to some people who feel the need to show up or be perceived in a certain way, to sort of lift that burden from them, because that's a very unique to today's culture sort of phenomenon as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have seen it in real time. I'm literally working with a couple that is having some major issues. I mean, maybe one doesn't even want to be in the relationship anymore. And I jump on social media and it's literally them on top of a mountain saying these amazing things to each other. And I think it's a way, especially for the one who may be struggling, who wants this to continue to work, to validate themselves and to receive validation that, no, this is good, this is working. Sometimes it's a way to cover up the part that is most vulnerable and sensitive so that other people don't know about it. And that's understandable. They're trying to protect that area of their life. And this is one way that
Mhm.
they can kind of keep that situation at a distance from other people who may know that there's something going on, but it's not reflective of the reality of what's happening in that with that couple. And it doesn't have to be a couple, right? It can be an individual who is kind of giving off this perception that everything is great and they're killing it and crushing being a parent or whatever it might be, but really there are struggles underneath that. And then sometimes it happens inadvertently. There are things posted that people perceive in a certain way, not necessarily intended by the person who's putting it out there, but then there's this assumption made that that person has it all together, which, we're human. We don't. We're going to struggle.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Any advice for someone who feels the need to show up in the world that way? And I feel really mean that I said that, because after you said those are the people that really want it to work, it makes me feel really bad for
I
feeling
mean, no, don't judge yourself.
sorry.
I'm giving best case scenario, right?
Yeah.
I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt, but there are also people who just they know they have issues, or maybe they're a piece of that issue, and that's part of the denial in it. I have to show up and make sure everything looks great because people can't see the flaws in me because I can't confront those flaws in myself. They're too painful. So there are many different ways that that happens, and honestly, what I would say is you want people to really like you and love you for you and
Mhm.
all sides of you. If you're putting something out there that's not really reflective of who you are, you're attracting people who don't know you.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be real about that. I also think there is so much connection and vulnerability. I mean, this is Brene Brown, all day long. But there's connection and vulnerability. When you share something of yourself that people can see themselves in,
Yeah.
that strengthens connection and communication and support in a very genuine way, not one that has anything to do with deception. And I think in the book too, I talk about, I'm a therapist, I'm a parent, and I have all this information from my line of work, but I still struggle with it like everyone else in those very human situations,
Yeah.
relationships, parenting, being a working mom. And I'm pretty transparent about that, I think, in the book.
Yeah. I gravitate toward people who innately have that vulnerability. And I'm
Mm,
noticing as I get older that not everybody feels safe enough to do that. And I used to take
mm,
that as sort of you know, a judgment on my character, or a reflection of my, like, okay, what's wrong with me that
mm, mhm,
I go to therapy. Here's my
mhm.
I cannot tell you how many times I've given the number of my therapist out that I use
Yeah.
both for my relationship and for my individual work, because I'm a constant, like, I don't care if there's a big life problem or a small life, I'm talking to a therapist.
Yeah.
There are
It's
even
great.
ask dozens of people, and I'm like, it's okay. Like,
It's okay.
this is why I do this show. This is why you do your work.
Yeah.
I mean, there should be no shame in that concept of vulnerability.
Yeah, no. And most therapists are in therapy. We have to be in therapy. We have to keep
Sure.
our own stuff in check and be aware of it because it can come out in our line of work and be harmful to them, but also for our own evolution and our own self-growth and our own awareness and strengthening, right? I kind of see therapy as kind of emotional, psychological, like
Gosh.
going to the gym, you know?
It's
So,
therapy is an investment in yourself, and it's
mm,
emotional intelligence. It's an investment
yes,
in emotional intelligence will lead, in my opinion, to success and happiness in other parts of it. If you can't control you, understand why you are, how and who you are, you're not showing up for anyone else in a meaningful way. That's
exactly
just
right.
my anyway.
Yep,
Okay, let's talk about
absolutely.
habits, or as people on social media like to call these days, rituals.
Yeah, rituals.
Overall, are these a good thing or a bad thing, and why?
It depends on the habit, right? Or the ritual. So if it's something that makes you feel more alive, that you're living your life fuller, more connected, more centered, they're great things. And the thing is, I mean, we have habits that are not fulfilling. And me, going on my phone whenever I'm bored is a habit that's not life-giving. So, and it's draining. And at the end of it, I can feel more tired. I can feel like I didn't make good use of my time. And no one has extra time. If you ask people these days, no one has extra time. They often say, I don't have time to do this thing. But then we can look at how much time goes into things like devices or watching Netflix. And they all have a place in our life. But if we really feel like we don't have time, we have to examine where the time goes. But when habits are centered around things that do make us feel more present, calmer, that reduce our stress, it can be a game changer in navigating this life, especially with all its challenges. So I try and outline some of the practices that we can begin to make habits just by taking small steps to incorporate them in our day that can really move us forward and have all these benefits just in terms of mental clarity and feeling peaceful and calmer and even feeling a greater sense of purpose with our life exactly how it is.
This is still the first half, guys. By the way, we will get to the second sort of half of the book where you do directly address the 8 pillars of contentment. But I
Yep.
kind of start with the issues and kind of then get to the solutions. I love the part in the book where you reference information on how different religions discuss contentment. And in
Mm,
particular, I was intrigued by the 4 truths of Buddhism that you detailed
yeah.
in relation to this whole concept of our constant desire to end struggling. We don't want to sit in discomfort. We want to move past it. Tell us a little more about those pillars and how one of those in particular impacted your view of what contentment and happiness really is.
Sunny, these are such good questions. Like people have not asked me these questions yet. I love them. Yeah, and it was really amazing. And when I wrote this book on such a ridiculous timeline. I didn't realize you have to turn in books a year before they're due, and a year
A
before
year?
they're
Oh
due.
my
Yeah,
gosh.
so I signed my contract mid December 2020, and the book was due April 2021. And no one does anything in December, right? When you're celebrate Christmas. So January to April, I got it pushed out till June. And when I was writing this book, when I say there was so many moments of divine intervention that I had a thought, and then all of a sudden I came across a piece of literature or research that exactly fit my line of thinking without even really searching for it. There was divine intervention in writing this book, and coming across those 4 pillars were part of it. And basically the ones that I discuss is that there is suffering in life, in everyone's life, no matter how amazing it looks, no matter how much money they have, they are going to have challenges just by virtue of being human. That is unavoidable. And what one of the pillars in Buddhism states is that part of what creates our suffering is this desire for more. And if we can, in Buddhism, they talk about eliminating desire, but I think at least keeping desire in check, right? Because we're not going to be able to eliminate desire. And some desires are good. We were made for certain desires, for love, for belonging, for connection. Those are innate desires that are really beautiful that we have. But especially for in the material realm, if we can keep these desires in check, we begin to reduce some of the suffering that we experience. So it went along with this idea of acquisition and achievement, creating this type of internal struggle that we are battling now as we're navigating life. So that's where that piece came into effect.
I'm curious. I'm looking at this through the perspective of having talked to some friends recently who are going through very serious health
Mm.
struggles.
Mm.
I hear something about the concept of the desire to end struggle. I'm trying to figure out how you would use that piece of advice for someone who is experiencing a life and death struggle, a
Yeah.
struggle over which they have no other desire
Control.
but to
Yeah.
survive. Yes, and no control. Can you sort of speak to that part of it as well?
Yeah. So the first key that I talked about in the book to contentment is acceptance. And it's practicing acceptance. And, there are certain situations where we know the outcome is difficult. Certain ones where it could go different ways. Not all diagnoses end in that worst case scenario situation, which, there's other ways to talk about, the finality of life as well in a spiritual sense that can be encouraging. But um, acceptance is a big piece of releasing some of the tension and the stress and moving on to other parts of your life that can foster contentment,
Mhm.
right? So when you're going through this health crisis, I mean, when you have to accept that this is hard, this is going to be hard, days are not going to be easy. At times we have to accept um, sometimes what the diagnosis is. Sometimes we can fight that and saying, I'm going to get through this, whatever it is. And when we do that, we alleviate some of the resistance that keeps us stuck in that negative place. We name the emotions, we acknowledge the experience, and then we might have a little bit more emotional, psychological capacity to try some of the other practices, such as, I had a friend who went through cancer, and she said, you can there is a terrible side of cancer, obviously, but there's also a beautiful side of cancer. She said, I have seen people show up for me. I have seen people call and care in ways I never had in my life. And I actually, as sad as it is, I never would have experienced this had I not gone through cancer. So
Wow.
there's someone who has both accepted a situation that's difficult, but also been able to then look at the beauty even in that struggle, even in that moment of challenge, and found contentment in that.
Mhm.
So it is part acceptance, which then frees us up a little bit more emotionally to step into some of those other practices.
Ugh, I love that. We could talk the whole episode about that, but we're going to move
Yeah.
on. There's so much good stuff to get to. And this is the next one. Okay, so the concepts
Mm.
really jumped off the page for me as well. Talk a lot about the power of intuition and how being connected to our true self can really be
Mm.
a guide. But you make a really important distinction here between the concept of following your emotions or trusting your gut, and
Yeah.
also marrying that with your mind and with logic.
Yeah.
Tell us about the wise mind
Hmm.
concept.
Yeah. Wise mind is a concept in. Can you hear me okay? Am I lagging?
You're good. We got you.
Oh, good. Wise mind is a concept in dialectical behavioral therapy. And there is this popular kind of platitude that says, follow your feelings, run with your feelings and trust your feelings, or trust your gut, which I I can see where that's coming from, but as an anxiety specialist, that term makes those statements make me very nervous because sometimes for my clients, that means like run like hell from whatever it is that's creating the anxiety. And wise mind is the meeting point between our rational self, as we know as our mind or our intellect, and our emotional self. And we don't necessarily let one rule over the other, but we find that meeting place between the two. And in the book, I call that is our voice of wisdom. It acknowledges and honors our feelings, but also the things that we know to be true
Hmm.
about who we are and about what we want out of this life. As a person of faith, I believe that's a place where God speaks, where the Holy Spirit speaks to me, where I've been led through this journey that I've been on. One thing I didn't tell you was right before I got that email from an acquisitions editor, I had a heart to heart with God. I was like, okay, I know this is a crazy time, but I felt in that place of intuition that that time was coming to write the book. I didn't know how or when or what it was going to look like. And it was literally a month later that I got that email from that editor.
I feel like you have supernatural powers, Nero. It's not the first time where we've talked where you've spoken of some real divine intervention kind of moment. I need to hang out with you more so because I need this direct line to God that you have.
I bet you have it, and I think anybody can have it. And part of why I wrote this book, Sunny, was we have so much noise circulating in our heads that we can't tap into that place. And I think by engaging in these practices, we can clear out some of the noise so we can hear. We can hear and be led from that place of wisdom. But there's so much circulating that unless we're intentional about clearing out that noise, we're not going to hear those really important messages that can really tell us things that might be coming.
Yeah, as a person who has medical anxiety,
Mm,
really, really like I've talked about this on the podcast several times. Like I've done a digital course on it. In fact, I have 2 more lessons I have to finish. But anyway, when you were talking about discerning our intuition from that sense of panic someone
mm,
can get from a triggering situation, it is important. And like my own therapist has worked with me on sort of viewing that as a circle and saying, okay, I'm going to chop it here, the
yeah.
thought, and say, like you just mentioned, my mind has to step in and say, okay, what is really the likelihood that A, B, and C are true? These things that are making me nervous. That was like a
Yes.
really big moment for me to realize that you can actually stop the pattern of it's not intuition, it's
Hmm.
anxiety speaking. So I
It's
love,
anxiety.
yeah, I love that distinction because I also feel that I have a very powerful intuition, but it can be blocked by that feeling
Yep.
sometimes. Yeah.
It can be. And anxiety speaks in our own voice, but it's not our voice.
Hmm.
There's a distinction there. It sounds like our voice, but it is not who we are. And that's an important distinction to make when we're hearing these anxious thoughts. And even for me, when I'm discerning, okay, is this a spiritual type voice?
Right.
Is this what I consider the Holy Spirit? Or for some people, they believe in the universe or intuition or whatever it is. Or is this a different voice? I have to ask myself, whose voice is this?
How do you figure
And
it out though? What's the one
yeah,
thing you do?
I mean, one thing, fear is not of God. It's not spiritual fear. That is the voice of anxiety. And that in and of itself, fear, self-doubt, um, those things that hold us back are not coming from that pure spiritual place. That's actually something coming against us. So even if we ask that question, whose voice is that? And we can hear self-doubt, we can hear fear, we can hear kind of negativity, not productive criticism, right? Not helpful criticism, but just negative thoughts. That is not that place of wisdom. And just by saying whose voice is that, I can discern that. I
Yeah,
can say, okay, no, no time for your voice today.
right.
I got other things to listen to.
I love that. Fear is not of God. I'm going to.
No,
Okay,
no.
so I want to kind of flip to the other side, the solutions-based side of the book. The
Hmm.
second half
Yeah.
is all about the 8 pillars of contentment. I'm just going to read through them and then we'll kind of cherry pick a couple that we can do a deeper dive into. But here
Sure.
are the 8 pillars of contentment: acceptance, self-compassion, gratitude, connection, present focus, priority and intention, resilience, and faith. Um, let's start with acceptance, and we'll
Mm,
probably won't have time to deep dive on all of these. You had a funny story in here too.
I
I literally laughed out loud. So you brought your daughter into the pediatrician who happened to be your
oh,
mom, and
yeah.
you were asking, you said, because you were like, oh, you know what, we're gonna, even though this is her grandma, we're gonna pretend like this is professional. I'm gonna say, well, listen,
Right.
she's having a hard time listening lately. And then your mom asks her why she's not listening well, and she goes, I want what I want.
Yeah. I want what I want. I think she was like 3 or 4, you know?
Oh my god! I mean, I laughed out loud at that. I guess 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds struggle with accepting what is versus what they want to. Tell us a little bit
Yes.
more about that.
Yeah, I mean, we want what we want, and when life doesn't look like that, when our expectations haven't been met, there's a natural resistance within us that comes against that. And
Mhm.
sometimes that resistance can prevent us from moving through it. It can prevent us from moving forward closer to the situations that we do want in our life. And the first piece of that is acceptance, is saying, okay, what, like that serenity prayer, what about this can I not change? But what about it can I change? And even in the situation that we can't change, what is still good in our life? Sometimes we can't access that piece of it, what is still good in our life, until we've practiced that acceptance. And I think in the book, I say acceptance is one of those things. It's easier to define by what it isn't than what it is. And one of the things I talk about is, people who ask why questions all the time. Why did this happen to me? Why am I going through this? Look, we're not going to have a lot of those answers on this side. We're not. So the why questions can prevent us. I think we need to ask them. If we're feeling it, talk about it, ask it, get it out. But recognize that even if we got answers, they may not be good enough in this moment with our limited understanding of our situation and our life purpose, even. So, by moving from the why questions and asking the what and the how questions. All right, how do I move through this? Um, how can I move forward in this? What can I still do? And what can I find purpose in, even amidst the situation? Even who questions? Who can I talk to? Who can I connect with in this moment? They can help us move towards acceptance in a way that the why questions can.
Oh, I love that. Marking that one down as well to keep. Okay. So self-compassion was another one. I want to move on to gratitude, which is
Yeah.
a pillar of contentment. Um, I say this, gratitude has become a platitude. Everybody knows about the
Yes.
power of gratitude these days, right? And the value of even a simple practice of writing down 3 things we're grateful for.
Yeah.
But I do want to double back on this because it does seem to be such a huge part of people's journey to contentment. So tell
Mm.
us a little bit about how gratitude can help us not only open us up to more
Yeah.
positive happening, but also make us feel a sense of happiness in the present.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, even with people who have anxiety. So there's something called the negativity bias, that our brains are wired to store more of the negative experiences rather than the positive, which from an evolutionary standpoint makes sense, right? If you're kind of surviving for your life in the woods, you want to be aware of when there's a bear there, not just sitting there admiring the flowers. So our brains have developed in that way. And people who have anxiety tend to go to the negative, the worst case scenario. I mean, they certainly have that negativity bias strengthened in their mind. But what gratitude does is it rewires our brain towards the positive. So any client I have who dealing with anxiety, which essentially is kind of worst case scenario negative thinking,
Mhm.
gratitude practice is part of their treatment, because we want to weaken those neural pathways that promote that negative thought, to the point where they get disintegrated, and we replace them with these pathways that move us towards seeing the world through a more positive lens. And gratitude is a practice that enables to rewire ourselves neurobiologically. It is powerful. It is a mood elevator. It enables us to re experience these pieces of life that we've experienced in the past that were positive. And our brain can't tell the difference between past and what we're reliving in the moment in detail. So we experience that surge of mood elevating neurochemicals again.
Tell us one quick thing to do every day, then one gratitude practice. We talked in promoting this episode about how you do have some really practical ways of including ways toward
Ah,
contentment that don't involve, like you said, taking a meditation trip to Nepal. So,
I know.
what do I do daily
That's right.
to feel
Because
better?
you and I, with all our kids, are not
I mean, I
going to
want to. Oh
Nepal.
my
I
God,
know.
seven children in paradise. Can you imagine?
Yeah, yeah. There'll be time for that. We need to put them on their own monastery, though. Um, so I think even just, I mean, when there is power, and it's shown in the research, that the effects of a gratitude practice last weeks to months longer if you're actually writing things down. So even taking a journal and bullet pointing, if you're not a writer, I even bullet point in my journal. I wrote a book, but not when it comes to my journal. Bullet point kind of 3 good things every day, or every couple days, even every 3 or 4 days, so that when you're feeling in that challenging situation, when you're feeling negative, you have one place to go to read them over. We could have had a great day on Monday, and by Friday we've forgotten it and are totally consumed with the stress of our life. But if we have a place to go back to, that's powerful. Even before you go to bed at night, take literally 60 seconds and say, what was good today? What
Can
did
you
I enjoy today?
say it in your mind rather than write it? Does it have the
Yes.
same
Yeah.
impact? Okay.
Yeah. Writing, the effects last longer.
Oh.
And I think that's what the research says. I mean, even
Mhm.
people who wrote a note of gratitude to someone and didn't send it experienced benefits that outweighed someone just saying it to someone. So there's something about writing that ingrains it in a different way. But
Okay.
you can still have positive benefits just by, before you go to bed, asking yourself that question: what was good today? Come up with two or three things. Or if it was a really bad day, ask yourself, what didn't suck today? Because that helps put it in
Yeah.
perspective if you're not feeling like life is great.
I remember going through a really bad period, and when I would pray at night, because I do make
Mm.
a practice of trying to be conscious at least of things I'm grateful for, and
Mm.
all I could come up with was, I got two legs that walk me anywhere I want to
Yeah.
go. And I mean, and,
Yeah.
and lungs that are breathing. I mean, like, even if it's that, even if it's a bed that you're
Yes.
sleeping, and there's always something.
There's something. And one thing that helps me access a place of gratitude, I think about who would give anything right now to be walking in my shoes,
Yeah.
to have the challenges that I have in this moment. Who would want that? And you can think of people who are in situations where they would much rather trade lives with ours. And that's not minimizing our own challenges, because we work through that, but also to give it a perspective that we might need in that moment.
I love that. Let's talk about another pillar of contentment that you talk about in the book, connection. What
Yeah.
is a mode of connection that's most helpful in moving us toward a sense of happiness or contentment?
Yeah, I really believe, especially coming through COVID, I mean, it was great to have screen connections, but face-to-face connection where we're trying to strengthen or build a relationship is definitely the most gratifying. And that could be, one thing I like to do is I like to schedule time to take a walk with a friend. That way I'm getting outside and getting some fresh air, which is also proven to have incredible benefits for our health, but also catching up with someone and being invested in their life and allowing them access to mine as well. So I do think that face-to-face connection is important. But we can also connect if we don't have those people in our life through service, through
Right.
volunteering, to joining some group or organization that you connect with people maybe that you don't know, but through a common cause, working at a food pantry. Go if you have the opportunity, going on a missions type trip, Habitat for Humanity, those types of things. But even an hour, couple of times a week, a couple times a month, I mean, can make a big difference in terms of connection. And all have been proven to release those mood elevating neurochemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin. So they work. They work to make us feel happier,
Awesome.
and content.
Okay. Let's go on. We have priority and intention is another one, present focus, but I want to talk about resilience.
Mm.
You run through a list of sort of characteristic or things that people can do to become resilient in the book. Can you just run us through quickly what some of those are? Because that is a worthy quality to try to attain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
people think that you're either born with resilience or you're not, but we can certainly cultivate a resiliency mindset. And what that is how I like to think about it, it's psychological and emotional flexibility. When we come to an expectation that hasn't been met, when we come to a situation that's difficult, for us to look at it and say, okay, this is hard, but I'm going to get through this. I've gotten through hard things in the past. And when we really can get strong in terms of a resiliency mindset, to be able to still see good in our life, even in that moment. And the interesting thing is, I put resilience at the end because a lot of the practices that cultivate resilience are those other keys that I talk about in the book: gratitude, connection, being present focus. Present focus also could mean being mindful of
Mhm.
the things that are happening around you, investing in the people who are around you. So, all of those practices do cultivate that type of resiliency mindset. And that's why I put it towards the end, one of the last keys in the book.
I love that. It's like we're adding them up and getting to that as a
Yeah,
primary.
exactly.
The last one, which I know plays a big part in your own sort of
Mm,
journey professionally and personally, is faith.
yeah,
And people that listen to this podcast, I'm sure, are from various faith
yeah.
backgrounds. I want to know how faith plays a role in your sense of contentment and how we can use that key, that pillar, to find that in our lives as well.
Hmm. So it's interesting when I was writing about faith, I know people who are content who don't have faith. That's a given. They're content. They feel happy in their life. And what the research says is it kind of questions, is it faith? Is it this individual connection with something bigger than you? Or is it that organized religion type setting and what that affords connection, opportunities to serve, common interests, a place of belonging, which meets one of our deepest needs, and people who love you, because they kind of have to. So they're in that setting.
Like
Uh,
family, you're stuck with me.
that's right. That's right. You can't be going to church and be like, I hate you. No, it doesn't work. So they're trying to differentiate between, is it that or actually this connection, this personal connection? And for me, especially going through COVID when we couldn't connect with people, when churches were shut down, that took that off the table for me. It was more me and God listening to that voice that
Mhm.
brought this deep sense of peace and contentment and this feeling like, you know what, you're going to be okay. That you're going to get through this. And that was even at the beginning stages when we really didn't know how this was going to play out. Yeah, you're working and you have 4 kids at home. I'm going to meet you in that and help you get through it. And there are different ways that we can experience that and people connect with that. Again, we're talking about that voice or that intuition. Um, but to me, that is at the center of my contentment. If I can connect to that voice, I begin to hear truth, what is true in my life,
Yeah.
uh, and be able to put other things into perspective. And it's a piece that you can't really explain until you've stepped into it,
Right.
because sometimes it is not reflective of anything going on. Your whole life can be out of control and in these incredibly stressful situations. But there's a piece that I find there, that I haven't been able to access in other ways.
Yeah, that's why to me, this is gonna make me sound like a bad Catholic. Going to church has
Nope.
never
Hmm.
been as important as my own. To me, faith is a private thing, and I always
Yeah.
sort of marvel at people who are the preachers of the world or the pastors of the world, and I know there's a need for people who are more vocal about their beliefs, but
Mhm.
it's so much less important to me to show that I'm faithful than it is to be faithful. And I think that it's important to like let people know, especially in the Christian sort of faith, where, like you said, there's community tied up in church going, and there's this expectation of front facing faith. Like, you're not
Yep.
a good Christian if you don't know the Bible. You're not a good Catholic if
Right.
you don't tithe. I mean, it to me that's BS. Like, you
Mhm.
you show up, and your book sort of was very sort of welcoming to people of all beliefs in that way, and saying, okay, it's not about the show. It's not about how you show up. It's about how you are inside, because
Mm.
that's to the contentment and the happiness that we're all sort of striving for.
Yeah, if I think what you said has so much insight into it, and if you think of any relationship, there are parts of that relationship that you might share with the world. Things that go on between you and your kids and things that go on with you and your husband. You might share that with the world, but then there are parts that are very private between the two of you, right? That were only meant for the two of you. And that's how I feel about faith too. There are
Yeah,
things that I share about it, and then there are things that are just between me and God,
right.
that are for me. And so there is that private piece of it. I'm really glad that you said the book was welcoming, because that was the intent.
Right.
I do believe that all of us have this ability to hear and to connect with God. I mean, people call that different things. But I believe, and I really believe God wants to be found. Like, he doesn't want to be hiding. He wants to help. So I think it's about, again, like clearing out the noise and making time for that stillness and that space, and to really listen and ask the questions that we come up with. And what we did see though in COVID as therapists, it was amazing. At one point, all of us, I mean, from different religions, non-religious, people coming in talking about faith and God and having these existential anxieties and even crises, because at a certain point, we all get to the point where this
Yeah.
life ends, right? And
Mhm.
at that point, there are questions. And even if you've been content your whole life without faith, at that point, you might start asking questions about what's next.
It was it
What's
it
next?
was, a confrontation of our mortality on an en mass scale, for sure, the pandemic.
Absolutely,
What ma
it
I
was.
just have to ask you this before we wrap. What makes you believe in God, Nero?
Oh, me. Um, I mean, when I I look at it from a couple different ways. I mean, when I've experienced God in my life, even the way this book came about, I mean, things don't happen that way. And it followed the path of I heard that this time was coming, and then the door opened right to it. Um, but also, I mean, I'm a Christian and not necessarily in a very organized sense, but I do follow Jesus and the life of Jesus. And not only have I experienced that voice in my life, just looking at his teachings and believing in that sacrifice, but I also have researched Jesus as a historical figure. I know he existed. He's
Right.
talked about in many other sources besides the Bible. So I know that there's a truth to that as well. It's not just a subjective experience that I've experienced, but it
Mm.
has been my personal experience and the continuation and the growth of that spirituality that keeps me connected to God. He keeps proving himself to me in my life.
I
You
told
know,
you I'm hanging out with you soon because you've got a divine hand on your shoulder, my friend. But like
well,
you said, we all can get there by
yeah.
cultivating that sort of sense of peace in our own lives. So
Yeah. I talk about just sit in that silence and ask the questions and listen for what comes to the surface. And to me, that's where I believe that God wants to speak. It is to the in the one to one. Yes, he speaks through churches, he speaks through different people. He can speak through an Instagram post, you happen to come across at the right moment. But there is so much. It's so rich that one-on-one experience when you can tap into it.
I am so grateful, Nero, for your time today. With an
Oh,
hour has flown by, and I'm just grateful that you gave us a peek into this amazing book. So it's called "This Book Won't Make You Happy," which is the best title ever. Just so I don't know, there's something so I don't know, cute and oh yes, it's okay, got it. So what will make me happy? Tell us where to
right.
find the book and when, more importantly, it will be available.
Yeah, so right now, actually, and this was another odd thing that we're still trying to figure out. The book started shipping out almost a month before the release date, which is a little unusual. So, just watching to see what that means. But you can find it Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target online, indie bookstores. You can go to your local bookstore if you want to buy local, which I strongly encourage, and
Right.
say, "Hey, can you get me this book?" And that's very much appreciated as well. But it is available right now, even though the release date isn't until next week.
Oh, good to know. And where do we find you on
Yeah.
social media, in
Yep.
person, for anybody who might be in your area?
Yep. You can. I live in Connecticut in Fairfield County, Ridgefield. But you can find me on social media at Nero Feliciano, at my website, nerofeliciano.com. And I write for Psychology Today, a blog called The Good Enough Life. And it's supposed to be two different, the good and enough, not like mediocre.
Yeah.
Um,
Don't be high
um,
heel people, okay? It's not just good enough.
that's right. It's good and it's enough. And also for anyone who orders this book before the 11th of April, I have some pre-order bonuses that you can get on my website. I have a 7-day guide. Sonny, you can get it too. It's called Satisfied. It's just 7 days, which really should be practiced over 7 weeks because you can't change your life in 7 days. It is a guide to feeling more satisfied with your life, and two videos. One on some of my best tips for anxiety, a very basic rundown of relaxation, breathing, and meditation, which can get us into that present focus mindset, and a little excerpt of the book too.
Awesome. Nero, thank you again so much for your time. I am so, so grateful for
Oh,
it.
thank you. I love seeing you and I love talking with you. And I love just all that you're doing and how you are being used in this world to bring so much hope and light. You have an important purpose.
Oh, thanks, Nero. That means
You
more than
do.
you know. Thank you, friend. Hope to talk to you soon. All right, guys, thank you for watching and or listening to this episode of We Gotta Talk. Wow, I feel peaceful. You know, those people that you hear their voice and you're like, oh, you just feel that they have a direct connection to God. That's Nero. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. Please do get it. It is very approachable. It's got advice that you can immediately start to put into effect right away that I promise will make you feel just a little happier and more content. If you haven't already, guys, leave a rating and review on the podcast, especially Apple Podcasts. That makes a huge difference in getting this show out to people who might enjoy it or find it useful in some way. So do that by opening the podcast app, scroll down on the show page, tap 5 stars, and leave your review. And that's it. We'll be back next week with more good stuff on We Gotta Talk. Thank you again so much for watching and listening, and we will see you soon.